Welcome to the More Than Velocity podcast. I'm Ryan Croton. We're here with Jordan Oseguera as the Director of Pitching Performance and really heads up tons of stuff for us on the sales side. We have a special guest today, Blaine Jones. Blaine is involved in quarterback training. Now, anybody who is alive, around the world who hasn't seen a football game, they know that you lose a first-string quarterback, it could be your season. A little bit different than Major League Baseball or some of the other pro sports where you could call up an arm, you could trade for one, but losing a quarterback is a problem. So Blaine, I'm going to turn it over to you, man. Why don't you introduce, yourself and, the things you're doing, how you're integrating the ArmCare product, because that's amazing.
Yeah. Obviously, thank you guys for having me on in the first place. I appreciate the opportunity. But yeah, Blaine Jones. I am a performance coach here at Velocity Athlete Development. We're in North Georgia, in Canton, Georgia, just about 45 minutes north of Atlanta. So I work with a lot of our baseball players, softball players, and our quarterbacks here at the facility. And I do that more so from a performance side where we have skill coaches that we use for leveraging the skill development side of things. But from a performance perspective, I use the armcare.com sensor with all of those athletes. So, usually that entails the initial assessment that we'll do with them, where we'll come in, get an arm score, see where they're at compared to their peers. And then we'll use that kind of as a benchmark. So obviously, with the minimum goal on the armcare.com sensor, we'll kind of try to meet that minimum threshold of that 70 score. And then we'll just try to build from there. So a lot of times, with the quarterback specific stuff, it's a very finite amount of time that we have with these athletes. And so we got to try to get as much in terms of an arm score to get them ready to play at the next level. So in terms of that, like a lot of the times what we're doing is just specialize and individualize arm care for that. So like I use the armcare.com sensor really to obviously drive other things that we're trying to do. So a lot of the times I'll look at the scores individually and see where we're at, whether it's more of like a scaption weakness, whether it's internal rotation, external rotation, from a strength perspective, or if it's really the mobility that's a limiting factor. But yeah, so I'll use that to kind of drive the individualization of it from a combine perspective. But yeah, that's really the background about me, and then how I use the armcare.com sensor for sure.
Yeah. So real quick, coming at it from my perspective, obviously on the pitching side, we're using the sensor almost every day, realistically, to increase, decrease, not change our programs, kind of keep throwing where it needs to be. What does that look like from the quarterback side in terms of adjusting throwing programs? What are you guys doing with that aspect of it? Because it's a whole new world for us.
Yeah. So I mean, what I'll do is a lot of times is we'll use that, every couple of days to see where we're at. So I mean, in the combine perspective, like it's a super controlled environment. You know what I mean? We essentially, as a performance coach, control every detail about what goes into their program for that. And so, I have somewhat of a general idea in terms of intensities of training and stuff like that we're looking at on specific days of the week. But I'll use the arm score or the armcare.com sensor to help kind of drive those metrics too. So like a lot of the times, we do typically it'll be like a Tuesday, Friday skill development for throwing for the quarterbacks, depending on the person. But usually I'll try to scale that to make sure that we're doing one day that's maybe like not as intensive throwing, and then one day where we're just fully letting it rip. But the way I use the armcare.com is really to confirm that knowledge. You know what I mean? So if I do something on a Monday and we're going to throw on a Tuesday from an armcare.com like sensor perspective, then we might need to scale back some throwing or something like that. So same concept as really what you use with pitchers. To me, it's super similar. And so I'll use that to kind of just drive training adaptation and to drive decision making more so.
What's the typical amount of throws that are made in a practice? I got a bunch of questions for you, but that's the 1st one. When you set a light day versus a heavy day, for people to understand the workload, what does that look like?
Yeah, so I mean, like a light day for me is like, it's obviously depending on who we have available in terms of catching the ball and stuff like that. But for me, like a light day would be maybe 20 to 30 throws, depending on what we're trying to do. And, we have obviously left side and right side of the field. So we'll try to maybe do 20 throws, 10 from each side and stuff like that. And that can climb all the way up to, including warming up and everything, to maybe 50 to 60 throws, depending on the day. I find it hard to get much more than that just from a time perspective as well. But yeah, that's usually how I'll kind of generalize it in terms of throwing for the quarterbacks.
I got another one in terms
Mhm.
of shoulder balance, because I want to go through a little bit more of the ArmCare details.
Mhm.
What are you seeing in the player? Because my mind is that the football's heavy compared to a baseball. You got to decelerate it back.
Mhm.
Are you seeing more guys that are really obviously pressing and things are important for the combine? I'm curious to see if guys are more front side imbalanced potentially. What do you typically see?
Yeah, so I mean, from what I've seen for the most part from the quarterback side of stuff is they're a lot of the times very internally like rotation biased in terms of the strength side. And I think that more so comes from the type of training that they do with either their schools, from a football perspective. Football players in general are trained a lot differently than how baseball players are, which is
Hmm.
obviously something that I kind of want to change a little bit. But they're very internally rotation biased because they do a ton of bench press, they do a ton of volume in that space. Um, and but the biggest weakness that I've seen for the most part is the actual like scaption. A lot of the times, like the football players compared to the baseball players, like they just have no idea as to like how weak their scaps actually are. Whether that's from like a scaption, whether that's from horizontal abduction, all that stuff, it's very weak comparatively. So I'd say they're definitely more biased towards that internal or that front side, um, and they're incredibly weak in terms of the scap.
What's the highest? What's the highest amount of total force or the highest arm scores you've seen? Because I'm trying
So
to scale. I'm looking at this with baseball, and I'm
mhm.
thinking, okay, it's a football player. I wonder if they're like blowing it out of the water.
I mean, I've had like some scores in the low hundreds. I mean, and some of them are just kids that are like really strong. But so, like for example, I have a kid that scored a 95, and he's going to play football and baseball at the Citadel, and he is super strong in terms of the strength side of the arm score. But comparatively, his range of motion is terrible. So, fear like it's just a matter of what the athlete has in terms of that. But I think that's probably one of the highest ones. I've had a 101. I've had one kid pop a 130, but that one was a little sketchy to me just from the size and everything. And he was skinny, so he was more so strong than anything compared to his body weight.
Hmm.
But yeah, I'd say that's the biggest ones that I've had pop. But I think more so than I've had crazy high ones, I've had extremely low ones. Like I have one kid that he was Division I level quarterback at a local school here in Georgia, um, pretty high level program, and he's probably 6'2", 6'3", 225, and he scored a 68. And I'm like, okay,
Mm.
we've got some work to do. So I think even more so from a quarterback perspective, I've had crazy low ones to
Mhm.
where it's like, okay, we got some work to do. Then I have high ones pop crazy
Yeah,
numbers.
that pops a couple questions into my mind is I know kind of before you jumped on with the arm care aspect of it, we'd been discussing a little bit. We had a couple of the NCAA teams running it, mainly the D1 level. We have a couple of the quarterbacks at the NFL level that run it to some extent, right? And what they've noticed is as they're increasing that strength and fixing the shoulder balance, very similar to baseball. Now, obviously in football, they're not busting out the radar gun, right? A lot of it is like, I'm throwing the ball harder. And you know, it's not it's not like on paper, like, hey, you gained 4 miles an hour. It's I'm throwing the ball harder. Everyone tells me it's coming out better. Do you notice that quarterbacks, as they build that arm score, as they're throwing the ball a little further, a little tighter spin, whatever that may be?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think more so even with the arm score, like in terms of a football perspective, we don't really have those metrics in terms of whatever it is, spin efficiency, tilt on the ball, spin axis. Whereas in football, it's more so of like that subjective type of things where like, hey, my receivers say it's coming out better, or me as a coach and the skill coach can see like visually that it's coming out of your hand better. So I think the biggest example of that was this past NFL Combine prep class. We had a quarterback from Grambling State, Miles Crawley, and when he came in, he was at an 80, which, you know, it is okay. It's got a ton of room for improvement. And the biggest thing that I noticed with working with his skill coach, Charlie Loeb, is that he whenever he was throwing off platform throws and not in rhythm of the throw, they weren't coming out quite as hard.
And
So
then just to clear up, like it's obviously a baseball podcast predominantly. What is off-platform throws? So number one, I don't know, and people listening probably don't know either.
Yeah, so like an off-platform throw would be like something where you're out of rhythm, where you might be throwing off the back foot, or you've had to shuffle right and throw at the same time,
Gotcha.
or you know any type of movement where you're not really sitting in the pocket and in rhythm on your throw like you would be with a pitch.
Cool.
And so from that perspective, like Miles was really good in rhythm, like could sling it 60, 65 yards with ease and rhythm. But if something to where we made him go off platform, it would kind of die out a little bit. So from that 8 weeks that we mentioned, he went from an 80 to an 87, and the off platform throws were just completely night and day. And obviously that's more subjective, but I take that as a win. If we see that change and our arm score is going up, then obviously we see benefit as to what we're doing.
Ryan, you look like you have a question.
What about like the SVRs? Like, do you know, obviously velocity is a big component of baseball. I mean, anybody, you know, who says it doesn't, I think they're missing the boat. A lot of what you're reading in the media is guys are throwing too hard. You know, the alternative is what, to underhand it. You know, that's not going to work. When you're doing football training, are you putting them on a radar gun to see how hard they're throwing the ball, or you know, do you utilize the SVR ratio, the strength velocity ratio?
Yeah, I'll definitely look at it a little bit. I'll say that I obviously have to take it with somewhat of like a grain of salt, just in terms of the velocity is very different in the type of object that we're throwing. So, like for me, and with the NFL draft prep process, I do look at the velocity. Like we will have them throw into a net and see where they're at, because nowadays with the NFL Combine, they actually do look at that metric. So they will have guys throw about 10 yards out into the net, or into a padding more so, and they'll look at the velocity. So, like, you know, obviously, in terms of the biggest hybrid that we have, Patrick Mahomes is the guy that's like that gold standard as to like what we're seeing in velocity. And so I will look at it a little bit, but obviously taking it with a grain of salt. So, like, for me, our goal is to try to get guys to be into that 60 plus miles per hour range with the football. Just because that's like a really good metric to be at in terms of the NFL level and what we're seeing those guys have.
Amazing. Do you guys use, like, you know, baseball, there's a lot of weighted ball work. Do they use weighted footballs, like in lightweight footballs? Are you throwing like junior footballs for arm speed? Like, what do you guys do on that particular special exercise side?
Yeah, so like I do use a lot of like the driveline care stuff in terms of throwing with them. And then we'll usually get into just regular football throwing. But I'll use like the obviously the overloaded implement, the underloaded implement to help potentiate them for the session. And we'll use that obviously just to build general arm strength. But in terms of actual like weighted stuff, like a lot of times what we'll do in training is we'll have different loads in terms of different times in the off season. So like different medicine ball throws, obviously from that perspective, like we'll start heavier in the off season, and then we'll kind of obviously narrow it down as the off season goes on. But yeah, so a lot of times I'll use that drive line type of stuff in terms of, you know, like the green ball. And then we'll like knock it down to like the blue and the red ball, and then we'll knock that down all the way to yellow and gray. And then we'll get them off to the skill coach.
You know, Jordan, you use footballs. I mean, part of the NPA process, I think a lot of guys were throwing them. I know just talking to players that have been, in that system. Talk to us about that, because there's like that crossover. I know when I throw a football, personally, for me, my arm path is better. Football, you can't, I don't think you can stab the ball, come back up and throw. It's an easier arc. I'm curious, you've talked about that with me, Jordan, about the football throwing, but why don't you get into that?
Yeah, I like the football. And again, to kind of pull from my mentor, Tom House, is you can't throw it with a spiral with bad mechanics. Like if you're rotating, if hips and shoulders go together, it's going to wobble like crazy. If you're yanking your front side, it goes up and down, right? Like if you're pulling your head, it's just a duck. So that's where like you cannot throw a spiral with bad mechanics. I've yet to see someone do it. I mean, doing that, we had, guys like Tom Brady, Drew Brees, Flacco, all these guys on 3D motion capture. And we also had some other quarterbacks that played in the NFL, obviously, and we had their kinematic sequences and everything. The bad kinematic sequences were ducks. The good kinematic sequences were great spirals, right? So that's why we like it for the baseball player as well. It's also like a low intensity, kind of like the original plyo ball warm up, right? Like you're working on mechanics, you're opening up external rotation, you're getting a little IR activation with the heavier ball. The one thing I have noticed though is I don't like to get the hard NFL footballs. I like to get the spongy ones because pitchers aren't necessarily the best at like running and catching. If anyone's ever seen a right side D, and it's always a jammed finger waiting to happen. So I like to get the softer ones just to start them out until we get a little bit more skill work in there, right? But I personally love footballs. There's something I'll implement in every once in a while. With some of my guys, I had to take them away again because the jammed finger issue. So always use a little bit of caution, and your mileage may vary on that. But I love football throwing.
Yeah, I'll use
I
that
want
sometimes with
to.
baseball players as well. Sorry to cut you off, Ryan, but I'll use that with baseball players as well, just because it also teaches, like for me, from a biomechanic perspective, it teaches a little bit more of that like tighter arm spiral action that I think we're seeing a lot more in baseball now. But I think it's just a way to help with sequencing of the arm spiral as well. It's super good for baseball players, and obviously with football players, I'll have them throw other implements as well, just to kind of vary up stuff, because they have no idea how to throw a baseball half the time. Um, so just from that perspective, I think it's a super good tool to use.
Talk to us about, what do you think are like the cornerstone key pieces that a quarterback needs to have when they throw? Like when you're coaching mechanics and you're looking at something like, wow, you're seeing something that's inefficient. What are those things that make them less effective?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously, from a sequencing perspective, just like how baseball is, we got to start from the ground up. So a lot of times, if they don't have the hip rotation that we need, then that's going to be a super limiting factor. Then working the way up the chain, if our T spine's not able to move, then we're not going to be able to create any type of separation in the throw. And then obviously our shoulders, if we don't have enough layback or we don't have enough, scap retraction or something like that, then we're not going to be able to create that efficient sequence. So I'd say that's probably the biggest three, you know what I mean, is hip rotation, spinal rotation, creating separation from that. And then obviously having enough layback and scap retraction to be able to pull the ball back and throw.
So we're obviously running low on time, which means we're
Mhm.
kind of the final two questions here. Um, if you can answer them in this order, that'd be great. Number one is from your experience in working with quarterbacks, why should a quarterback even get arm care? Like, what are the benefits of it? And then the second one, where can someone in your area reach out to you? Can you work with players outside your area? Where do they find you? So social media, email, whatever that is. But if you don't mind answering those, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say any tool that can help you obviously become a better player is going to be some type of added value. And I think obviously with armcare.com and you guys, what you guys are doing is that it's super available to everybody, right? So any player that, can maybe save up a couple bucks can go and get this device that will tell you every day objectively how good your arm is. You know what I mean? And especially in a day where arm talent is like a premium ask. You know what I mean? Like everybody has arm talent for the most part at the NFL level. So what are you going to do to be able to separate yourself from those guys that just have natural talent? And it's the same thing that goes to pitchers. There's always going to be guys that throw 95, but what are you going to be doing when you're throwing 82 to be able to get to 95? So I think that's the biggest thing as to why you need to get the armcare.com sensor and use ArmCare to better yourself as a player. So, I mean, that is 99% of your job is to be a good thrower. So if you can't do that to your best of your ability, then obviously you're going to end up losing your job to somebody. And then, yeah, in terms of, people outside of the area, we absolutely can train people outside of the area. Like we'll train people from Carrollton that are maybe like an hour and a half away. So that's always stuff that we're looking to do. If anybody has any questions, obviously I'm always open to answering anything. I'm an open book. You can follow me on Instagram at velocity_BJ, or shoot us a message on our website at www.betheday.com.
Awesome. We'll make sure to put that in there. And Ryan, any closing questions on your end?
No, I just closing remarks is that, if you're a throwing athlete coming from any sport, you're listening to somebody who's really kind of advancing all the components of, a player, and he really knows where the arm's at and knows how to train it. So, it's just another example of individualized training, workload management to optimize the athlete. And Blaine, thank you so much, man, for being on this. And this is a wrap.
Awesome. I appreciate you guys for having me. It was a blessing.
Awesome. Thank you. And make sure you guys check out his social media, and we'll see you guys in the next one.